I've always loved the smell of printing ink. It was the smell of my fingers every night when I came home from my job at Horizon Publishing. 73 years old, and I still wake up in the morning and think for a moment that I need to proofread a new novel or coordinate the cover layout. It's funny how a lifetime's work gets embedded in you. But today I woke up with a different feeling. Today I decided it was finally time to live for myself. My suitcase was in the hallway, my plane tickets to Madrid sitting on my dresser. 2 months in Spain, a trip I'd been dreaming of since I first read Hemingway in college. All this time, I'd been putting off this trip, first for my career, then because of little Austin, then because of his studies, then because of his wedding. My phone vibrated, breaking the silence of the morning. My son's name on the screen made me sigh. Austin called every morning, not to wish me a good day, but to remind me once again that I'd forgotten something or done something wrong. Mom, did you remember to pay our internet bill? He started without greeting. Good morning, Austin, I replied calmly. No, I paid it yesterday, as well as the electric bill at your house. Bridget said she hadn't gotten a confirmation. I transferred the money to your account. Check it, please. He checked something, then reluctantly admitted, Yes, I see. But why didn't you tell us? I sent the message last night. I already knew what was going to happen next. You know Bridget goes to bed early. His voice took on a familiar note of irritation. I closed my eyes. Austin was my only child. After Edward, my husband, died when Austin was 8, I'd raised him alone. I worked overtime, turned down promotions that required moving, and was always there for all school assemblies and sporting events. I was a mother and father, a friend and mentor. And now he's 45, and he calls every day to see if I've paid his bills. I'm flying out today, Austin, I reminded him, changing the subject. The silence on the other end was more eloquent than any words. Are you sure that's a good idea? At your age, traveling alone. At my age, I repeated with a slight chuckle. People usually do things they've been putting off all their lives. Mom, Bridget, and I were thinking you could babysit in July. We wanted to go to the lake. That's a phrase I heard every time I planned something for myself. Grandchildren's illnesses before my get-togethers with girlfriends. Austin's sudden business trips when I was going to trade shows. Bridget didn't work, but somehow I always had to look after my children. My tickets are non-refundable, Austin, I said firmly. I'll be back in 2 months. He snorted the way he did when he was a kid and didn't get what he wanted. Bridget will be disappointed. She was counting on you. Once upon a time, words like that would have made me cancel all plans. But not today. You'll be fine. After all, they are your children. I was relieved when the conversation was over. A lot of people thought I was weak, compliant, but today I felt a strength in me that I thought I'd lost years ago. My gaze fell on the shelves of books, my treasure. Collecting rare editions was my one true passion that I hadn't sacrificed for my family. Over 40 years, I have amassed an impressive collection. First editions, author-signed copies, rare translations. I ran my fingers over the spines, saying goodbye. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Dorothy, my neighbor and only real friend in Whitefish, stood on the doorstep. Are you ready to conquer Spain? She smiled, handing me a box of chocolates. Don't forget about me when you're flirting with the hot Spaniards. I laughed. Dorothy was 78, and she never missed an opportunity to joke about hot men. She had already lived 15 years after her husband's death, enjoying life to the fullest. She was my opposite and an inspiration. You made up your mind after all, she said, walking into the living room. Had your sister-in-law thrown a tantrum yet? Not yet, but Austin tried to talk me out of it. E? I'm flying to Spain in 4 hours. She nodded approvingly and looked at my suitcase. Helen Parkhurst, you packed too many books and too few dresses. You know I'm not going for dresses. No, but you could use one hot romance novel. She winked. I shook my head, but something inside me responded to her words. After Edward died, I hadn't even let myself think about another man. First out of grief, then out of fear, then out of habit. What if I did meet someone in Spain? The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. Austin called about paying the bills, I said, coming back to reality. Sometimes I feel like I've raised a perpetual child instead of a son. You just did too much for him, dear. Dorothy was always blunt. Remember when he was 20 and he failed his exams? I remember. Austin failed an entire semester of college because he preferred partying to studying. I took an extra job to pay for his retakes. Or when he decided to go into that ridiculous sports nutrition business. Dorothy continued. Who paid his debts when it all fell apart? I just wanted to help. You always just wanted to help. And now he's 45 and he's calling you to see if you've paid his bills. I sighed. Dorothy was right. All my life I'd been saving Austin from the consequences of his own decisions. I thought I was protecting him, but I was actually keeping him from growing up. You know, after Arnold died, Dorothy said quietly, I realized one thing. We come into this world alone and we leave alone, and every day between those 2 points belongs to us alone. Children are a blessing, but they don't have to be your whole life. It's your turn to live for yourself now, Helen. There was a truth in her words that I had long refused to recognize. I had always put Austin's needs before my own. When Edward died, I turned down a promotion at the publishing house because the new position required more time. When Austin went to college, I put my plans to write my own book on hold to support him financially. When he got married, I helped with the down payment on their house. And what did I get in return? A son who couldn't function without my help, and a daughter-in-law who saw me as nothing more than a free babysitter and an ATM machine. In the newsroom, we called it red pencil syndrome, I said, looking out the window. When an editor gets so caught up in correcting errors that he or she destroys the original voice of the author. I did that to my own son. Dorothy squeezed my hand. It's never too late to change a story, honey. Look at you, 73 years old and a whole Spain ahead of you. Some books are best started in the middle. I smiled. My whole life has been spent among books, first in college, studying literature, then in publishing, where I rose from junior proofreader to managing editor. I've spent decades helping others tell their stories. Maybe it's time to start my own. What are you going to do in Spain? Dorothy asked. I want to visit the Prado Museum, see Picasso's Guernica, try real paella, I mused. And I want to find a book. A book? I nodded. The first Spanish edition of For Whom the Bell Tolls. It was published underground during the Franco era. They say there are only about 20 copies left. And you're gonna find one of them? I know several booksellers in Madrid and Barcelona with whom I've corresponded over the years. One of them, Enrique, has promised to help. Dorothy shook her head. Only you can go to Spain and look for an old book instead of flamenco. Books never disappoint, I shrugged. Unlike people? She asked shrewdly. I didn't answer. We both knew the answer. With the exception of Dorothy, everyone close to me had disappointed me in one way or another. Edward had died too soon. Austin had grown up dependent and selfish. Bridget never hid her annoyance at my presence in their lives, even when she had my help. Did you give Austin power of attorney? Dorothy asked, changing the subject. Yes, just in case. Anything can happen in 2 months. Helen, don't you think it's just a formality? I interrupted. I'll still be in touch. Dorothy looked unconvinced, but didn't argue. Well, I gotta go. The cab will be here in half an hour. I stood up. Promise me one thing, Dorothy said seriously. Don't check your phone every hour. Don't call Austin every day. Don't worry about how they're doing without you. It's their life, and this is yours. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear and excitement. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself. Spain was waiting for me. New places, new people, new stories, and maybe, finally, a chance to rewrite my own. I'll bring you a fridge magnet, I joked, hugging Dorothy goodbye. Better yet, bring a story you're not ashamed to tell your grandchildren, she winked. When Dorothy left, I took another look at the house where I had lived for almost 40 years. Here I'd raised my son. Here I'd mourned my husband. Here I'd spent sleepless nights over the manuscripts of young authors, the shelves of books, the old armchair by the fireplace, the photographs on the walls. It was all part of me. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel tethered to these walls. Something inside me was tearing outward, something that had been buried under years of self-indulgence and routine. I grabbed my suitcase, locked the door, and headed out to face a new chapter of my life. Spain was waiting. Madrid greeted me with the embrace of the hot sun and the hum of unfamiliar speech. After the long flight, I felt tired, but there was an unfamiliar excitement inside. For the first time in decades, I was truly free. No calls from Austin asking me to pick up my grandchildren from school. No sour smiles from Bridget when I brought home-cooked meals. Just me and an unfamiliar city waiting to be discovered. My little apartment in the Chueca neighborhood turned out to be perfect. Cozy, with a tiny balcony littered with flowers and clay pots, and, most importantly, with a bookstore right under the windows. The landlady, the boisterous Señora Carmen, explained to me in a mixture of Spanish and English where the nearest supermarket was and how to get to the subway, and then left me alone, promising to come back in a couple of days. I set up my things, took a shower, and went out onto the balcony. Downstairs, evening life was buzzing. Young people rushing to bars, older couples strolling, holding hands, street musicians strumming their guitars. Life flowed in its leisurely Spanish rhythm. The phone vibrated, a message from Austin. "Did you make the flight? Why aren't you calling?" I sent a short reply. "I'm fine, tired after the flight. Talk to you tomorrow." He immediately replied, "Mom, you're supposed to call when you land. We were worried. Do you remember to take your medicine?" I smiled. Worried? Or we're checking in? Over the past few years, Austin's concern had felt more and more like control. Back at the airport, I'd made a decision. For 2 months, I would relieve myself of the obligation to report to my own son. So I simply muted the notifications and put my phone on the nightstand. The first week in Madrid flew by like a dream. I walked around the Retiro, getting lost among the green alleys and stopping at every sculpture. I spent hours wandering the halls of the Prado, pausing in front of paintings by Goya and Velázquez. I drank vermouth in small bars where the owner knew every visitor by name, and strangers became friends by the end of the evening. On the 8th day, I finally decided to visit a bookstore recommended to me by an American bookseller, El Passage. It was located in a narrow alley in the old town, and it was almost impossible to find it without a navigator. The bell above the door jingled melodiously as I stepped through the threshold, and I was enveloped by the familiar smell of old books, a smell I had loved all my life. The store was larger than it looked from the outside, with a maze of shelves rising to the ceiling and narrow aisles between them. Behind the vintage cash register sat a man in his 60s with a neat gray beard and thick tortoise-shell glasses. "Buenos dias," I said, hello, using one of the few Spanish expressions I knew. He looked up from his book and smiled. "Good afternoon. May I help you?" He spoke in perfect English with a slight accent. "You must be Enrique Gutierrez?" I asked. "My name is Helen Parkhurst. We corresponded about the Spanish edition of For Whom the Bell Tolls. His eyes lit up with recognition. Ah, Senora Parkhurst, the editor from Montana. Yes, of course, I've been expecting your visit. He stepped from behind the counter and kissed my hand gallantly, a gesture that would have seemed ridiculous in Whitefish. But here, in this old store, among the dusty folios, it was perfectly appropriate. I found something that might interest you, Enrique said, leading me into the back of the store. It's not the edition you were looking for, but perhaps even rarer. He pulled from the top shelf a small book in a worn leather binding. First Catalan edition, 47th year, translated by Joseph James y Olivet. Only 50 copies, printed clandestinely. Most were destroyed by Franco's agents. I took the book carefully. The yellowed pages, brittle and thin, rustled under my fingers. The smell of old paper and printing ink filled my lungs like the scent of expensive perfume. It's beautiful, I breathed out. Yes, it is, Enrique agreed. But when I looked up, he wasn't looking at the book, he was looking at me. Something in his gaze made me feel like I hadn't felt in a long time. Notable, interesting, alive. In Whitefish, I was just Austin's mom, or the twins' grandmother. Here, thousands of miles from home, I was Helen Parkhurst again, a woman with her own passions and history. Can I offer you a cup of coffee? Enrique asked. There's a small coffee machine in the back room. Not the best coffee in Madrid, but not the worst either. I agreed, and we spent the next 2 hours talking about literature, Spanish history, and our lives. Enrique told me that he had lost his wife 5 years ago and had been living alone above his store ever since. His two daughters had gone to America, one teaching in Boston, the other working as a doctor in Seattle. Sometimes I miss them so much I can't breathe, he admitted, but I'm glad they are living their lives. Kids should be free to create their own stories, shouldn't they? I told him about Austin, about my work at the publishing house, about my collection of rare books. Enrique listened attentively, asking questions and genuinely interested in my answers. It was refreshing to talk to a man who saw me not as a source of help, but as an equal interlocutor. You should go to the book fair in Barcelona, Enrique said. It starts in 2 weeks. There are booksellers from all over Spain. If you are seriously looking for that edition of Hemingway, this is your best chance. I was planning to go to Barcelona. I nodded. I'm going there too. I have a booth there. Maybe we could. He hesitated, and I was surprised to realize that this confident Spaniard had suddenly become shy. Meet there? I'd love to, I replied, feeling my cheeks begin to burn. When I got back to my apartment, my phone showed 5 missed calls from Austin. I didn't call back. Instead, I went out on the balcony and watched the sun set over the rooftops of Madrid, painting the ancient buildings golden. These days, I discovered a new Spain, not a touristy Spain with its postcard views, but a real living Spain with its own rhythm and character. I learned how to order tapas without looking in a dictionary, got used to late dinner and afternoon siesta, made acquaintances among the locals, and even began to speak simple Spanish. Every day I visited Enrique in his store. He showed me the hidden treasures of Madrid, small squares where the locals danced flamenco in the evenings, secret courtyards with fountains invisible from the street, family restaurants where no menus were served because only one dish was prepared, the one the hostess decided to cook that day. And in the evenings, I would return to my apartment and find messages from Austin, each more insistent than the last. Mom, why aren't you answering your phone? You need to check that account. I can't find the details. The twins are asking when Grandma's coming back. I answered briefly, no details. Something in me resisted the idea of sharing my new experiences with my son. These moments were mine, and I didn't want them overshadowed by his disapproval. 2 weeks later, I traveled to Barcelona. Enrique helped me book a small apartment near Plaza Catalunya and insisted on walking me to the train station. "Don't get lost in Barcelona," he said as he helped me with my suitcase. "This city has a way of making people forget where they came from." "Maybe that's exactly what I need." I smiled. He squeezed my hand. "I'll see you at the fair, Helen." Barcelona was a city that looked like something out of a surrealist novel. Gaudi's winding creations, the narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter, the hustle and bustle of the Rambla, all made me feel like I was in another world where the usual rules didn't apply. The book fair was housed in an old building of a former tobacco factory. Dozens of stands with rare and antique books, the smell of old paper and leather bindings, the quiet hum of connoisseurs and collectors' voices. I felt at home among this organized chaos. Enrique found me at the booth of a French bookseller who was showing me the first Paris edition of Fiesta. "Here comes the American guest," Enrique exclaimed, approaching me. "How do you like Barcelona, Helen?" "It's magical," I replied sincerely. "I feel like I'm 30 again." 30? He frowned theatrically. "No, this city makes women even younger. 25, no less." We spent all day at the fair, going from booth to booth. Enrique seemed to know every vendor and introduced me as his American friend who knows more about Hemingway than Hemingway himself. By the end of the day, I was dizzy with impressions and new acquaintances. And when Enrique suggested having dinner at a small restaurant by the sea, I agreed without hesitation. The restaurant turned out to be exactly as I had imagined a real Spanish place. Tables right on the beach, candles and glass candlesticks, the sound of waves instead of music. We ate the freshest seafood, drank cold white wine, and talked about books, travel, and life. "You know, Helen," Enrique said when the waiter brought dessert, "I see something special in you. You're like those rare books we look for, ordinary on the surface, but inside there's a whole world waiting to be discovered." At other times, I would have been embarrassed or joked away. But this evening, under the starry Barcelona sky, I simply accepted the compliment with gratitude. "I've spent most of my life helping others tell their stories," I said. "Maybe it was time to start my own." Enrique raised his glass. "To new beginnings, it's never too late to start a new chapter." We clinked glasses, and in that moment I felt truly free. It was as if years of obligations and expectations had fallen from my shoulders, and I could finally spread my wings. The following weeks flew by like a dream. I traveled around Spain, Seville with its orange trees and Moorish palaces, Granada with its majestic Alhambra, the small coastal towns of the Costa Brava, where time seemed to stop. And everywhere I was accompanied by Enrique. He took a vacation and became my unofficial guide, showing me Spain through the eyes of a local. We drank sangria in the squares, watched flamenco in the caves of Sacromonte, argued about literature, and laughed like I hadn't laughed in years. And in the evenings we sat on the terraces, holding hands, and I felt not like a 73-year-old widow with a grown son, but just a woman enjoying life and the company of an interesting man. The phone rang less and less often. Austin seemed resigned to the fact that I wouldn't answer every call he made. But one evening, as Enrique and I were returning from the Opera House in Barcelona, the phone burst into a series of messages. "Mom, this isn't funny anymore. You must come home immediately. At your age, you can't behave so irresponsibly. If you don't come back, we'll have to take action." I showed the messages to Enrique. "Take action?" He frowned. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." I felt the tension that had receded over these happy weeks stiffen my shoulders again. Austin had always had a flair for the dramatic. Enrique took my hand. "Helen, you're a grown woman. You have a right to be here. You have a right to be happy." "I know," I nodded. "But Austin, he's used to me always being available to him. that I always put his needs before mine. And how long has that been going on? His whole life, I answered quietly. 45 years. Enrique shook his head. Maybe it's time to change that pattern. I didn't answer. Two parts of me were fighting inside of me. A mother who had always been willing to sacrifice everything for her son, and a woman who was only now beginning to live life to the fullest. The next day, I called Austin. The conversation was tense. "Mom, you have to come back," he insisted. "You're too old for this kind of adventure. What if you get sick? What if something happens to you? Who will be responsible for you?" "I'm responsible for myself, Austin," I said firmly. "I'm 73, not 103. I'm of sound mind and perfect health." "Bridget thinks you're being irresponsible. You're not thinking about your family." I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about family for the last 45 years, Austin. Right now, I'm thinking about me, and I'll be back, as planned, in 2 weeks. Mom, if you don't come back now—" "What, Austin? What are you going to do?" The silence on the other end was more eloquent than any words. "I love you, son," I said more softly. "But these 2 months are mine. I earned them." After the conversation, I felt devastated, but also strangely liberated. For the first time in a long time, I put my needs before my son's, and the sky hadn't fallen to the ground. That evening, I told Enrique about everything as we ate dinner on the terrace of my small apartment in Barcelona. "I think I let Austin control my life for too long," I said, looking at the lights of the city below. "I always thought I was doing the right thing by helping him, but maybe I was just keeping him from being on his own." Enrique covered my hand with his. "A mother's love is a complicated thing. We want to protect our children from all difficulties, but sometimes the best thing we can do for them is to let them face those difficulties." I looked at this amazing man who, in a matter of weeks, had become closer to me than many people I had known for years. How strange, I thought, that it took traveling halfway around the world to find someone who sees the real me. "You know," Enrique said, pouring more wine, "I have a suggestion. The last week of your trip, let's go to a small village on the coast where I have a house. It's quiet, beautiful, and away from the tourists. You could end your Spanish adventure there." I wondered. Austin kept sending messages, demanding that I return early. Part of me wanted to give in, to do what the old Helen would have done, to put his peace of mind before my joy. But I wasn't that Helen anymore. "My pleasure," I replied, raising my glass. "Here's to the last week in Spain." Enrique smiled, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of my own joy and freedom. I didn't know what awaited me when I returned home, but I was sure that whatever it was, I would greet it as a new Helena woman who had finally learned to live for herself. The return flight from Barcelona to Montana seemed endless. I stared out the window at the clouds below and thought about the last 2 months, the happiest of my life in a long time, of evenings with Enrique in little tapas bars, of the sound of the sea in his seaside cottage, of talking until dawn, and a silence that was never awkward. As a farewell, he gave me the very same Catalan edition of Hemingway that he showed me on the first day we met. "So you won't forget Spain," he said, handing me the carefully wrapped book. "How could I forget?" I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. We exchanged promises to call each other, to write letters, and I even invited him to visit me in Whitefish. But some strange foreboding clawed at me from the inside. Over the past week, the messages from Austin had stopped altogether, which was unusual for him. Dorothy hadn't returned my calls either, probably problems with her old cell phone again. The cab from the airport to my house seemed slower than usual. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of Whitefish and felt a strange alienation, as if I were back in a town I'd once lived in, but had long since forgotten. "Here we are, ma'am," the driver announced, pulling over to the curb. "This is number 26, isn't it?" I frowned, looking out the window. The cab was a few houses away from mine, and the driver was obviously mistaken. "No, my house is down the street," I said, but something in his gaze silenced me. "Ma'am, the address you gave is 26 Pine. We're here." I got out of the car, feeling the ground start to go out from under my feet. Where my Victorian two-story house with the green shutters should have been, there was a completely different structure. A new modern home with minimalist landscaping and large panoramic windows. An unfamiliar silver SUV stood in the driveway. "There must be some mistake," I muttered, pulling out my phone. But there was no error. The GPS showed that I was standing exactly where my house was, Sosnovaya, 26. Only the house itself no longer existed. Panic gripped me. I hurried down the street to Dorothy's house, leaving the surprised cab driver with my suitcase. Maybe I'd just gotten the wrong address. Maybe it was some kind of ridiculous joke. A few houses away from where my house used to stand, I saw a pile of boxes on the sidewalk. Some of them had been opened, the contents scattered on the ground. Books, framed photos, some clothes. I recognized my belongings. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. I knelt down in front of the boxes, going through my belongings with trembling hands. Family photo albums, kitchen utensils, linens. Almost my entire life was piled here on the curb like trash. The phone in my bag vibrated. A new message from Bridget. "You're homeless now. I hope Spain was worth it." I sat on the sidewalk, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, unable to comprehend what was happening. Cars drove by. Passers-by threw curious or sympathetic glances at me, but no one stopped. In a small town like Whitefish, people preferred not to get involved in other people's problems. "Helen? Oh my God, Helen!" I looked up and saw Dorothy rushing toward me with a frightened face. "You're back." She helped me to my feet. "I tried to call you, but you didn't answer." "What's going on, Dorothy?" My voice was shaking. "Where's my house? What happened to my things?" She hugged me, and I felt her body shaking too. "Austin sold your house 2 days ago," she said quietly. "I only found out yesterday when the workmen came and started taking things out. I tried to stop them, but they showed me the papers." "ID?" I pulled away, looking into her eyes. "What papers? I didn't sell my house. Austin used the power of attorney you gave him before you left," Dorothy explained. "He sold the house to some construction company. They tore down the old house and built a new one in 2 months. These people worked day and night. The world shook around me. Austin sold my house, the house I'd lived in for almost 40 years, the house where I raised him, where I kept all the memories of my life. But how? How could he? I choked with indignation and pain. The power of attorney was only for emergencies. Dorothy shook her head. "I don't know the details, Helen, but let's go to my place. You can't stay here on the street." She helped me gather a few essentials from the boxes and took me to her house, promising to come back for the rest later. I moved as if in a fog, unable to comprehend what had happened. In Dorothy's cozy living room, I was finally able to regain some of my composure. She made a strong tea, added some brandy to it, and made me drink it. "I have to call Austin," I said, pulling out my phone. "He needs to explain what's going on." Dorothy didn't discourage me, though I could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't expecting anything good to come of this conversation. Austin answered after the first beep, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "Mom, you're back." His voice sounded strangely calm, even detached. "Austin, what did you do?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was shaking. "Where's my house? Where are all my things? We were acting in your best interest." he said in the tone one uses with a disobedient child. You're clearly incapable of making rational decisions. Disappearing for 2 months, not answering your phone, spending money on something stupid. Stupid things? I choked with indignation. It was my dream, and it was my money. Your money that should have gone to your grandchildren's education, he retorted. Instead, you're spending it traveling around Europe with some Spaniard. I froze. How did he know about Enrique? Were you following me? Of course not. He grinned. But you have Instagram, Mom. Did you think we couldn't see pictures of you with that book dealer? Holding hands on the beach, eating at restaurants. At your age, I remembered Enrique helping me create an account so I could share photos of my trip. We uploaded some shots from Barcelona and the coast there. I didn't realize Austin or Brigitte would be viewing them. That doesn't give you the right to sell my house, I said firmly. It does if you're clearly showing signs of senile dementia, he said coldly. A sensible 73-year-old woman wouldn't drop everything and run off to another country to have affairs with strangers. Dementia? I couldn't believe my ears. Austin, are you crazy? I'm perfectly healthy and sane. Not according to Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris was a local internist who had been seeing me for years. I haven't seen Dr. Harris in 6 months. But I have, Austin replied, and described your irresponsible behavior to him. He agreed that it could be the first signs of dementia and recommended that we take control of your finances. I was enraged like I'd never been enraged in my life. You used my power of attorney to declare me incompetent and steal my house? Not steal it, but sell it for a good price, he corrected me, as if he were explaining basic things to a child. The money went into a trust fund for the twins, for their education and their future. Where do you expect me to live? I asked, barely containing the tremor in my voice. We found you a really nice place at the Pine Hills nursing home. There are nurses to look after you, 3 meals a day, a library. You'll be fine there. I sat there, unable to utter a word. My own son was planning to send me to a nursing home and use my money to secure his children's future. What about my bills? I finally asked, already knowing the answer. I've put the bulk into a trust, Austin confirmed. You have a small amount left for personal expenses. Bridget will be in charge of your spending, so you don't spend it all on another adventure. I remained silent, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal. The son I'd given my life to, the one I'd supported in everything, had robbed me of my home, my money, and even tried to take away my independence. Mom, this is all for your own good, Austin continued, obviously mistaking my silence for humility. You're not young anymore. You need help and supervision. Pine Hills is a great place. Bridget has already taken some of your things there. The ones she didn't throw on the sidewalk? I asked quietly. What? He seemed surprised. Your things were supposed to be packed up and taken to the storage unit. No one threw them out on the sidewalk. I grinned bitterly. Apparently, your wife decided otherwise. When I arrived, my books, photographs, and clothes were strewn across the street like trash. There was a pause. Even Austin seemed to be shocked by this news. I'll talk to Bridget, he said at last. There must be some misunderstanding. The move is scheduled for tomorrow. A car will pick you up at 10 in the morning and take you to Pine Hills. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. And that was the end of that conversation. I hung up the phone, feeling my hands shaking. Dorothy, who had been silently watching the conversation, moved closer and put her arm around my shoulders. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. I shook my head, unable to answer at once. Shock, pain, and rage mixed inside me into a toxic cocktail. I'd always thought I knew my son well, that our bond was unbreakable despite his selfishness and dependence on my help. but what he had done was beyond anything I could have imagined. "He sold my house," I whispered, still not believing what I was saying. "Took my money, and now he wants to put me in a nursing home." "They can't do that," Dorothy said firmly. "You're sane. You can stand up for yourself. But the power of attorney? A power of attorney gives you the right to act on your behalf, but it doesn't take away your legal capacity," Dorothy said. "You need a court order for that." I looked at my friend with renewed hope. "Do you think I can challenge it?" "I'm sure," she nodded. "And I know who can help you." She took out her cell phone and dialed a number. "Norman, it's Dorothy. I need your help. It's about Helen Parkhurst." Norman Hayes was a longtime friend of both of us and one of the best lawyers in Whitefish. Once upon a time, before my marriage to Edward, Norman courted me, but I chose someone else. Nevertheless, we remained friends, and he was always helping me with legal matters. An hour later, Norman was sitting in Dorothy's living room, listening intently to my story. His wrinkled face remained unruffled, but there was indignation in his eyes. "What your son did is illegal, Helen," he said when I finished. "The power of attorney authorizes you to make transactions on your behalf, but only for your own benefit. Selling the house without your consent and putting your money into a trust for your grandchildren is a clear abuse of power and trust." "But he claims he got Dr. Harris's report on my dementia," I said. Norman chuckled. "Dr. Harris can't make such a diagnosis in absentia based on a third person's account. It requires a comprehensive examination and a court order to establish incapacity. Austin is bluffing." "What do I do?" I asked, feeling the fighting spirit inside me begin to flare. "For starters, revoke the power of attorney," Norman answered. "I'll prepare the documents today. Then we'll file a lawsuit to invalidate the sale of the house and to recover your money from the bank accounts." "Do you think we can get the house back?" I asked hopefully. Norman thought, "It will be difficult, especially if the new owners have already moved in. But we can demand compensation equal to the full market value. And that's much higher than the amount Austin sold the house for to the construction company." "How do you know that?" "Because that company has been buying up properties in your neighborhood for several years," Norman explained. "They specialize in building model homes quickly and reselling them. I'm sure Austin sold your house for well below market value." Dorothy shook her head. "To think of selling her own mother's house? Money often destroys family ties," Norman said philosophically. "I've seen wealthy people disinherit their own children, and children send their parents to nursing homes for their inheritance. But to sell your mother's house while she's on vacation, that's a new level of sleaze." As I sat listening to their conversation, something was changing inside me. The shock and pain of my son's betrayal was still sharp, but it was joined by a new feeling: determination. Determination to fight, to stand up for my rights, and perhaps to finally set the record straight about my relationship with my son. "I want to sue," I said firmly, "not just for a refund, but for fraud. If Austin abused the power of attorney and my trust, he should be held accountable." Norman raised his eyebrows in surprise. "This is a serious step, Helen. Are you ready to sue your own son?" I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering all the years of unconditional love and support I'd given Austin, all the sacrifices I'd made for him, and this was how he'd repaid me. "Yes," I answered firmly, opening my eyes. "I'm ready." Norman nodded respectfully. "Then we'll get started right away. I'll prepare all the necessary documents." When he left, Dorothy squeezed my hand. "Are you really ready to go against Austin?" I looked at her with a bitter smile. "You know, I realized one important thing in Spain. I've spent my whole life editing other people's stories, but I've never been the author of my own. always adjusting to other people's expectations, sacrificing my own desires for others. But it's time to take pen in hand and write a new chapter. And if Austin doesn't want to be a part of this story, that's his choice. Dorothy hugged me silently, and in that hug, I felt more support than I'd ever gotten from my own son. That night, I hardly slept at all. As I lay in Dorothy's guest room, I thought about how drastically my life had changed in one day. Just yesterday, I was happy in a small coastal town in Spain with a man who saw me as a woman, not just a mother or grandmother. Today, I'm homeless, with minimal personal belongings and an uncertain future. But instead of despair, I felt a strange calm. It was as if the events of this day had simply confirmed what I had already realized in Spain. It was time for me to live my life by my own rules. Early in the morning, I was awakened by the phone ringing. It was Enrique. "Helen, how was your flight? How was your house?" I couldn't hold back my tears as I told him what had happened. He listened in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. "It's awful," he said when I was done. "What are you going to do?" "Fight," I said firmly. "I'm not going to let Austin and Bridget take my life away from me." There was a smile in his voice. "There she is, my warrior. I knew you wouldn't give up." "I learned a lot in Spain," I said, "and most importantly, that it's never too late to start living for yourself." After talking to Enrique, I felt energized. I showered, put on one of the few dresses I'd salvaged from the sidewalk, and called Norman to check on the progress of the paperwork. When the minivan with the Pine Hills logo pulled up to Dorothy's house at 10 in the morning, I was ready. I opened the door before the driver could make the call. "I'm not going to the nursing home," I told the stunned man. "Tell that to whoever sent you." I closed the door and returned to the living room, where Dorothy watched me with admiration. "What's going to happen next?" she asked. I smiled. "Next, we go to the bank. I have to check my accounts in person and revoke all my powers of attorney. And then," I paused, "then we go to war." Norman's office was in an old brick building on Whitefish's Main Street, one of the few surviving examples of early 20th century architecture. Inside, it smelled of leather, wood, and paper, smells I'd always associated with reliability and stability. "Good morning, Mrs. Parkhurst," Norman's secretary, a young woman named Paige, said with a friendly smile. "Mr. Hayes is expecting you. May I offer you some coffee?" "Thank you, dear," I nodded. "Black, no sugar." Paige escorted me to Norman's office and returned a minute later with 2 cups of steaming coffee. Norman Hayes looked almost exactly the same as the day 45 years ago when I'd turned him down and married Edward. The same shrewd blue eyes, the same neatly trimmed gray hair, only the wrinkles were deeper and the glasses thicker. "I've prepared the paperwork to revoke the power of attorney," he said, handing me a folder. "As soon as you sign, I'll send them to the notary and the bank. From now on, Austin won't be able to handle your finances anymore." "If there's anything left," I said bitterly, signing the papers. "There's something else." Norman handed me another folder. "I checked the sale of your house. As I suspected, Austin sold it well below market value. A typical house in your neighborhood is worth about $700,000. He sold it for $480,000. But why? I wondered. If he wanted the money for the trust fund, why not sell it for top dollar? Norman chuckled. "I suppose the construction company offered him a reward for a quick deal. A kickback, to put it bluntly." I shook my head, finding it hard to believe that my own son could stoop to such a thing. After everything that had happened, though, nothing should have surprised me anymore. "What about my bank accounts?" I asked. "The situation here is even more interesting." Norman pulled out a third folder. "Austin had indeed transferred most of the money from your accounts into a trust fund for the twins. But not all of the trust fund belongs to them. According to the documents, Bridget is the trustee of the fund, and she is authorized to use the money for the education and welfare of the children. That is, in fact, for anything, I clarified. Exactly, Norman nodded. The wording was vague enough to justify any expenditure. A new car? That's for the children's safety. Home remodeling? It's to create a healthy living environment. I clutched the armrests of my chair with my hands, trying to contain my anger. How much did they take? Almost all of your savings, about $350,000. I closed my eyes. It was money I'd saved all my life saving for vacations, working overtime, saving every paycheck. And now it was all gone. What are we going to do? I asked, opening my eyes and looking at Norman. We sue, he said firmly. We demand that the sale of the house be declared null and void for conflict of interest and abuse of power of attorney. And we want the money back from the bank accounts. But that would take months, right? I clarified. And where would I live during this time? What will I have to pay for legal services? Norman smiled, warmly, with a touch of that special feeling he had had for me all these years. Don't worry about my services. I'll take a percentage of the amount we recover. And as for housing, Dorothy said you can stay with her as long as you need to. I can't take advantage of her hospitality. I shook my head. I need to find a job, get an apartment. It won't be easy to get a job at your age, Norman said gently, especially in a small town like Whitefish. I wondered. He was right. Despite my experience and qualifications, few people would want to hire a 73-year-old woman. I have another option, I said after a pause. My books. Books? Norman raised his eyebrows. My collection of rare books, I explained. I've collected them all my life. Some of them are quite expensive. Weren't they left in the house? Norman asked worriedly. I don't know, I answered honestly. When I arrived, there were only some boxes of my things on the sidewalk. I need to check what happened to the rest of them. Norman nodded. I can put together a request to the construction company and the new owners of the house. If your personal belongings were left there, they are obligated to return them. Or you could just ask Austin, I suggested. He should know where the rest of the stuff went. Okay, Norman agreed. But let's finish the legal formalities first. I need your signature on a few more documents. We spent the next hour filling out paperwork and discussing the details of the upcoming trial. When everything was ready, Norman put down his pen and looked at me over his glasses. Helen, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. It's about custody. Custody? I frowned. Custody of who? You, he said softly. If Austin is really trying to prove that you're incompetent, he can try to get custody of you. That would give him control over all your actions and decisions, including where you live and your finances. I felt a chill run down my spine. He can't do that. I'm in perfect health. Of course he can't. Not if you pass a medical examination. Norman nodded. I've arranged with Dr. Chang from Kalispell. She's an independent psychiatrist specializing in gerontology. If she confirms that you're fully competent, Austin won't be able to get custody. I agreed to be evaluated, and we made an appointment with Dr. Chang the next day. After that, I called Austin. Mom, his voice sounded strained. I heard you refused to go to Pine Hills. I'm not going to a nursing home, Austin, I replied firmly, and I revoked my power of attorney. You can't handle my money anymore. There was a pause, during which I could almost physically feel his irritation growing. It's a stupid decision, he said at last. You can't live alone, and you don't have a home. Thanks to you, I said. Where did you put the rest of my stuff? Only a small part of it was on the sidewalk. They're in storage, Austin answered reluctantly. We were going to move them to Pine Hills after you moved in. I want my books, I said. All the books in my collection. They're in storage, too, he said, a note of impatience in his voice. They're just old books, Mom. What do you need them for? It's my collection, and I want it back, I insisted. Where is this vault? He reluctantly gave me the address and the access code. I asked Dorothy to take me there right after I met Norman. It was a faceless building on the outskirts of town, divided into separate sections with roller shutters. My things were in section number 23. When Dorothy and I lifted the roller shutter, I saw neatly stacked boxes and furniture covered with protective tape. At least they didn't throw everything in the dump, Dorothy said. I started looking for my books and soon found them in the far corner, 5 large boxes labeled Library on the side. When I opened the first one, I was relieved to see the familiar leather bindings of my most prized copies. They're here, I exhaled. Every single one of them. Dorothy peered into the box over my shoulder. I've never understood why you treasure these old books so much, she admitted. I pulled out the top book of first edition of The Great Gatsby in perfect condition. This old book is worth about $120,000, I said. I bought it for $20,000 15 years ago. That's a good investment, isn't it? Dorothy whistled. You're kidding. $120,000 for one book? I smiled, stroking the leather binding. Collecting rare books isn't just a hobby, Dorothy. It's an investment. Some copies appreciate 5 to 10% each year. My collection is conservatively estimated to be worth about $1 million. Dorothy looked at me wide-eyed. And Austin didn't know. He knew I collected books, but he was never interested in their value, I explained. To him, they were just dusty old volumes that took up space. Bridget had suggested several times that we get rid of them to make room for something useful. And now you can sell part of the collection and solve your financial problems. Dorothy shook her head. How ironic. They stole your money but left a real treasure. I carefully tucked the book back into the box. I need to contact the appraiser and the auction house. Some copies I can sell immediately, but for maximum profit, it would be better to put them up for a specialized auction. Dorothy and I loaded all 5 boxes of books into her car and drove back to her house. On the way, I called Enrique in Spain and told him about my find. That's wonderful, Helen, he exclaimed. I can put you in touch with several collectors who will be thrilled with your Fitzgerald and Hemingway. I thanked him and promised to send him a detailed list of the books I had. That evening, I received a message from Austin. We need to talk. Come over tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Bridget will be home. I showed the message to Dorothy. Are you going to go? She asked anxiously. What if it's a trap? What kind of trap? I grinned. They can't make me sign a new power of attorney or consent for a nursing home. Still, I don't trust them. Dorothy shook her head. Especially Bridget. Neither do I agreed. But I want to look them in the eye. I want them to know that I'm not broken, that I'm not going to give up. The next day, at 2 o'clock sharp, I stood on the doorstep of Austin and Bridget's house, a spacious, modern mansion in the upscale Whitefish neighborhood, a house I'd given them money for a down payment on 10 years ago. The door was opened by Bridget, a slender blonde with perfect manicures and a perpetually disgruntled expression. She looked good in her 42, but artificial. Too much Botox, too impeccable styling. Helen. She nodded without a smile. Come in. Austin was waiting for me in the living room. He looked tense and nervous, fiddling with his cufflinks, avoiding a direct gaze. Mom, he began as I sat down in the chair across from him. We wanted to discuss the situation. What situation? I asked calmly. The one where you sold my house, stole my money, and tried to put me in a nursing home? Bridget grimaced. Don't be dramatic, Helen. We were acting in your best interest. Really? I looked at her with fake surprise. How exactly is throwing my photo albums on the sidewalk in my best interest? It's a misunderstanding, Austin quickly interjected. The movers were supposed to pack everything neatly into storage, and they decided to hold a sale of my stuff on the street instead? I shook my head. Don't lie to me, Austin. It was done intentionally to humiliate me. Bridget snorted. Not everything revolves around you, Helen. In this case, I said firmly, it's about my house, my money, and my life. So, yes, it does revolve around me. Austin looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mom, we just wanted to make sure you were safe and taken care of. After you ran off to Spain and started acting inappropriate. Inappropriate? I questioned you. What exactly was inappropriate about my behavior? Was it that I was enjoying life, traveling, meeting new people? You were having an affair with some Spaniard, Brigitte blurted out. At your age, it's indecent. I laughed. Indecent? Oh my God, Bridget, we're not in the Victorian era. I'm 73, I'm a widow, and I have every right to a private life. But what will people think? She insisted. What will the kids at school say when they find out their grandmother is having fun with foreigners? If you're so worried about what other people will think, maybe you should be more worried about what people will say about the daughter-in-law who threw her mother-in-law's stuff on the sidewalk. I parried. Austin tried to change the subject. We heard you revoked the power of attorney and consulted with Norman Hayes. Yes, I confirmed, and we're suing, both of you, for fraud, abuse of power of attorney, and attempting to incapacitate me without cause. Austin's face turned pale, and Bridget jumped up. You can't do that. We're your family. Family doesn't steal money from each other, I said calmly. A family doesn't sell a house behind each other's backs. A family doesn't try to lock their elderly relatives in a nursing home against their will. We were doing it for your own good, Austin exclaimed. No, I shook my head. You were doing it for you, for the Twins Trust Fund, which Bridget ran, for your comfort, so that you wouldn't have to worry about me, for your own profit. I'm sure you got a nice kickback from that construction company. Austin twitched as if struck by a blow. I hit the mark. What do you want? Bridget finally asked, crossing her arms over her chest. Why are you here? To give you a chance to make things right, I replied. Give me my money back, make up the value of the house, and we can avoid a public scandal. They looked at each other. That's impossible, Austin said slowly. The money is already in the trust. The house is sold. Then I'll see you in court. I stood up, getting ready to leave. Wait, Austin grabbed my hand. Mom, think about your family, the twins. If you go to court, it'll all go public. Everyone will know you're suing your own son. And everyone will know you stole from your own mother, I countered, releasing my hand. You can choose which is worse. We can make a deal, he said hastily. Maybe not the whole amount at once, but gradually. I can pay you, say, $1,000 a month? I shook my head. That would take 30 years, Austin. I don't plan on living that long. I headed for the door. You have until Monday. Then we're filing a lawsuit. You can't win, Bridget shouted after me. You don't have money for good lawyers. I turned around in the doorway. I'll find the money, don't worry. And by the way, Bridget, I smiled my sweetest smile. You should change your beautician. Your right eyebrow is noticeably higher than your left. I walked out, closing the door behind me, and took a deep breath of fresh mountain air. Dorothy was waiting for me in the car across the street. How did it go? She asked when I sat down next to her. They're not going to give anything back, I replied. But it doesn't matter. I have another plan. Your books? Dorothy guessed. I nodded. Would you please call Norman? Tell him we're going to his office. I have something important to discuss. Half an hour later, Norman, Dorothy, and I were sitting in his office, looking at the pictures of my book collection that I had taken that morning. Impressive, Norman whistled, looking at a picture of the first edition of The Great Gatsby. Are you sure you want to sell these books? They must have sentimental value to you. Some, yes, I agreed, but most I collected as an investment. I always knew I might need them someday. And that day has come, Norman said thoughtfully. How much do you plan to make? Dorothy asked. If you sell the whole collection, about $1 million, I said. But if you sell individual pieces to the right buyers, you can get a lot more. Do you have contacts? Norman asked. Some, I nodded, and Enrique promised to help. He knows a lot of collectors all over the world. Norman tapped his fingers on the table. If you can get at least half of the estimated value of the collection, it will be enough to hire the best lawyers and experts. We'll tear Austin and Bridget to shreds. I looked at him in surprise. I'd never heard him speak with such rigor before. This isn't just a case for me, Helen, he explained softly, noticing my gaze. It's personal. I've always cared about you, even when you chose Edward. I felt tears come to my eyes. Thank you, Norman. I don't know what I would have done without you and Dorothy. Don't thank us, Dorothy smiled. Tell me what you said to that upstart Bridget last night. I saw her face in the window. She looked as if she'd swallowed a lemon. I laughed and recounted our meeting. For the first time in days, I felt the ground beneath my feet feel a little firmer. I had a plan, I had friends, and I had the determination to fight to the end. So, Norman summarized, we sell some of the books, hire lawyers and experts, and file a lawsuit against Austin and Bridget. And then what? Do you plan to stay in Whitefish? I've been thinking. It was a question that had been on my mind for days. I don't know, I answered honestly. After everything that's happened, Whitefish doesn't feel like home anymore, but I don't want to make any rash decisions. I need to deal with the current problems first. That's reasonable, Norman nodded. But know that you have options. With the money from the book sales, you can start a new life anywhere. Maybe in Spain? Dorothy smiled slyly. Near a certain bookseller? I felt myself blushing. Dorothy, we're just friends. Of course we are, she winked. That's why you're blushing like a schoolgirl. Norman coughed delicately. Anyway, let's concentrate on the immediate problems. I'll contact Christie's auction house and arrange for an appraisal of your collection. In the meantime, he pulled a checkbook out of his desk drawer. Let me lend you some money for operating expenses. Norman, I can't. Yes, you can, he said firmly. Think of it as an advance on a future retainer, or a loan from an old friend. Choose what you like, but don't argue with me, woman. I laughed and accepted the check, knowing he wouldn't back down. Thank you. I'll pay every cent back as soon as I sell my first books. I know, he nodded. Now go home and get some rest. We have a lot of work tomorrow. When Dorothy and I left the office, she took me under her arm. You know what's the funniest thing about this whole situation? She asked. What? Austin and Bridget thought they'd stripped you of everything and made you helpless. But in reality, they freed you from all your obligations and gave you a chance to start a new life. Without a house to maintain, no past to drag you back, you really are free, Helen. The week after meeting Austin and Bridget flew by at a breakneck pace. I called appraisers and booksellers in the mornings, met with Norman and his legal team in the afternoons, and sat at Dorothy's kitchen table in the evenings, absorbed in documents and notes. You work like you're 30 again, Dorothy said, putting a cup of tea in front of me. Even on vacation in Spain, you probably didn't rest as well as you should have. It was different in Spain, I smiled, rubbing my tired eyes. There I rested my soul. Now I needed to concentrate on coming up with the perfect plan. The plan did require careful thought. Norman had found a legal loophole. The power of attorney I'd given Austin was designed to handle emergencies involving my property while I was away. It did not expressly authorize the sale of real estate or the transfer of large sums of money into trust funds. In those cases, the court looks at the intent of the settler, Norman explained during one of our meetings. And we can prove that your intent was not to authorize your son to sell your house without your knowledge and consent. But the power of attorney was notarized, I objected. Isn't that enough? A notary certifies the authenticity of the signature, not the content of the document, he explained. Besides, we can prove that Austin wasn't acting in your best interest, but in his own, which is a direct breach of fiduciary duty. My editorial skills came in handy. I spent hours putting together a chronology of events, analyzing financial documents, and looking for inconsistencies. Years of working on manuscripts had taught me to spot logical fallacies and find ulterior motives. You're writing this statement as if you were editing a detective novel, Norman said, looking over the documents I'd prepared. In a way, I am, I replied. Only in this story, I am not only the editor, but also the protagonist. In parallel with my legal training, I was selling my books. The first to leave the most valuable copies, the first edition of The Great Gatsby, and signed by Ernest Hemingway, copy of Farewell to Arms. Enrique was incredibly helpful in this matter. He put me in touch with several serious collectors from Europe willing to pay above market price for certain editions. You can't imagine the excitement about the news that Helen Parkhurst's collection is for sale, he said during our next video call. You're already a legend in the bookseller's world. A legend? I laughed. Just an editor from Montana? An editor who amassed one of the finest private collections of 20th century American literature, he corrected seriously. Helen, you underestimate the value of your collection. The first sales brought me about $200,000, enough to pay my legal fees and rent a small apartment in Whitefish. I felt bitter about parting with books I'd collected for decades, but each book sold brought me closer to beating Austin and Bridget. Don't worry, Dorothy consoled me. You can always start a new collection. Spanish literature, perhaps? She winked meaningfully, and I couldn't help but smile. Enrique and I continued to talk every day, and our bond grew stronger despite the distance. 2 weeks after I returned from Spain, something unexpected happened. Enrique announced that he was flying to Whitefish. I can't just sit in Barcelona while you go through all this, he said. Besides, I want to see your collection in person. There are some serious buyers who need my expertise. The news that he was coming gave me a new lease of life. I rented a room for him in a small hotel, not far from the apartment I had just rented, and looked forward to seeing him. Enrique arrived on Thursday, and when I saw him at the airport, I realized how much I had missed him. He looked tired after the long flight, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. Helen! He hugged me as if we hadn't seen each other in years instead of a few weeks. I'm so happy to see you. We spent the evening in my new apartment discussing strategy for selling my remaining books and my legal plan. Enrique listened attentively, asking precise questions and offering insights. Did you know that publicity is often used in cases like this in Spain? He said when I told him about the difficulty in proving Austin's malice. A story about a son who sold his mother's house while she was on vacation would cause public outrage. The newspapers, television, all of it could create pressure. I shook my head. I don't want to bring family problems into public discussion. Even after what they did? Enrique was surprised. Especially after that, I replied firmly. I don't want to stoop to their level. We will win this case fairly, using the law and the facts. Enrique smiled. You're an amazing woman, Helen Parkhurst, and that's why He didn't finish the sentence, but his look said all that was needed. The next day, Enrique and I went to the storage room where my book collection was. I watched him carefully go through the volumes, assessing their condition, making notes in a small notebook. I can sell these 5 copies immediately, he said, setting aside a few books. I have a buyer who collects just such editions. He is willing to pay a premium price if we guarantee authenticity. We can provide certificates and purchase history. I nodded. Everything is documented. Excellent. Enrique made another note. That will give you about another $150,000. I sighed. Even if we sold everything, it wouldn't be enough to buy a new house like the one I lost. Enrique took my hand. But it will give you freedom of choice, Helen. You'll be able to decide if you want to stay here in Whitefish, next to the people who betrayed you, or start a new life somewhere else. There was a truth in his words that I didn't want to admit. Part of me still clung to the past, to the family ties, no matter how painful they were. The day after Enrique arrived, we met with Norman in his office to discuss lawsuit strategy. Norman was impressed with Enrique's analytical skills and his knowledge of international law. You make a great team, Norman remarked as he watched Enrique and I work on the documents. Helen finds all the logical inconsistencies, and you, Enrique, offer unexpected legal arguments. Years of working with rare books have taught me the intricacies of copyright law and international agreements. Enrique shrugged. When you deal with valuable editions, you need to know the laws of different countries. Our work was interrupted by an unexpected phone call. Paige, Norman's secretary, said that we had an uninvited guest, Austin. Let him in, Norman decided after a short meeting. Austin didn't look well. A wrinkled suit, circles under his eyes, a nervous tick at the corner of his mouth. He cast a wary glance at Enrique, but didn't ask who it was. Mom, we need to talk, he said, ignoring Norman and Enrique. Alone. Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of my friends and my lawyer, I replied calmly. Austin pressed his lips together. Okay, I'm here to offer a compromise. We'll return half of the money from the bank accounts and pay $100,000 in compensation for the house. I glanced over at Norman. That offer was ridiculous. What about the charges of fraud and breach of trust? I asked. Would they just disappear? We were acting in your best interest, Austin repeated stubbornly. By selling my house behind my back? By stealing my savings? By throwing my stuff out on the street? I shook my head. No, Austin. That's not a compromise. It's an attempt to avoid responsibility. What are you suggesting? His voice became tense. Norman intervened. A full refund of all bank accounts, compensation for the house at market value, compensation for moral damages, and a public apology. That's impossible, Austin exclaimed. We don't have that kind of money. Where is the money from the sale of my house? I asked. Where are my savings? Austin looked away. We had debts, and we've already spent some of it. On what? I asked demandingly. Bridget wanted a new car, he admitted reluctantly. And we'd booked a vacation in Hawaii, and we had to pay for the pool repair. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. When did he turn into this selfish, irresponsible man? Was he always like this, and I just didn't want to see it? Did you steal my savings to buy your wife a new car? I asked quietly. The money I'd been saving all my life? We were going to pay it back, he muttered. In time. Get out, please, I said, feeling a lump come up in my throat. I'll see you in court. There was silence in the office after Austin left. I sat staring at the space in front of me, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal. Helen, Norman said softly, we can postpone work for today, if you want. I shook my head. No, now I'm even more certain that we must see this thing through, not just for the money, but for justice. We worked late into the night preparing the lawsuit. My editorial meticulousness came in handy more than ever. I found the slightest inconsistencies in the financial statements Norman had obtained through the court, identified inconsistencies in Austin's testimony, chronologized the events to the exact hour. You're not writing a legal document, but a true accusatory novel, Enrique said, watching me work. 40 years of editing other people's texts. I smiled. I know how to make a story convincing. The next day, Enrique arranged a meeting with a collector from Chicago who had flown in to see the 5 books he had selected earlier. The meeting was a success. The collector was delighted with the condition of the editions and agreed to the offered price without bargaining. It's more than we expected, Enrique said as we drove back from the meeting. $185,000 for 5 books is a great deal. That's enough for a down payment on a small house, I said thoughtfully. Do you want to stay in Whitefish? Enrique asked, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. Part of me wants a fresh start somewhere far away from here, and the other part doesn't want to run away, like I've done something wrong. You could come to Spain, he suggested quietly. It doesn't have to be forever. Maybe for a few months, until the trial is over. The idea was tempting. Back to the sun and the sea, to leisurely evenings in small cafes, to conversations about art and literature. A man who saw me as a woman, not just an old mother in need of care. I'll think about it, I promised. The money from the book sale was deposited into my new bank account, which was at a different bank from the one where I'd had the previous accounts Austin had accessed. I now had enough money not only to pay my legal fees, but also to live comfortably for the coming months. The first court hearing is set for next Wednesday, Norman informed me when we met in his office 2 days later. Be prepared for it to be a long process. Austin has already hired an attorney, Gregory Palmer. Palmer? I frowned. Didn't he specialize in criminal cases? Yes. Norman nodded. An odd choice for a civil suit for fraud and breach of trust. But don't worry, our position is stronger. I didn't share his confidence. Something about the choice of counsel alarmed me. Why hire a criminal law specialist for a civil case? I wondered aloud. Unless they plan to turn the case into a criminal case. Enrique finished for me. Maybe they're going to press counter-accusations. What charges could there be against Helen? Norman was indignant. She's a victim, not a criminal. Enrique tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. In Spain, in cases like this, they often charge that the elderly person is incapacitated and needs guardianship. If they can convince the court that Helen is incapable of making intelligent decisions, all her actions, including revoking the power of attorney and filing a lawsuit, can be invalidated. But that would require medical evidence, Norman objected. They have Dr. Harris's report, I reminded him. Austin had said that the doctor agreed with his concerns about my mental health. That's an unsubstantiated assertion. Norman dismissed it. Harris can't make a diagnosis in absentia. But what if he lied? I insisted. What if he told Harris that I was showing signs of dementia and he believed him? Norman frowned. Then we need to disprove that conclusion. You've already been examined by Dr. Chang. Her conclusion that you are fully competent will be a strong argument in our favor. We continued working on the paperwork, but the thought of Austin's possible strategy kept me on my toes. If they really did try to make me look incompetent, it could complicate matters considerably. That evening, when Enrique and I returned to my apartment, I received a text from Bridget. I hope you're ready for everyone to know about your mental state. It's going to be funny watching you try to prove you're still sane. I showed the message to Enrique. They're bluffing, he said confidently, trying to scare you into dropping the lawsuit. Maybe, I agreed. But what if they do have some evidence? What evidence could they have against a gerontologist's report? Enrique pointed out reasonably. Dr. Chang confirmed that you're fully capable. I nodded, but my anxiety didn't let go. Bridget was too sure of her message. The next morning, Enrique and I went to meet another potential book buyer, a literature professor from New York who collected first editions of modernist prose. Mr. Bradford is willing to pay a premium price for your first edition of Joyce's Ulysses, Enrique informed us as we drove to the meeting. He'd been looking for it for over a decade. Ulysses? I frowned. But I don't have a first edition of Ulysses. I've been looking for it for years, but I've never found a copy in good condition at a reasonable price. Enrique looked at me in surprise. But he said he saw it in the catalog of your collection, the one I sent him. What catalog? I stopped the car on the side of the road. Enrique, I never cataloged my collection. He pulled a folder out of his briefcase and handed it to me. Inside was a professionally designed catalog with photos and descriptions of my books, but among them were copies I'd never owned. Where did this come from? I asked demandingly. You sent me this file 2 weeks ago. Enrique replied confused. By email, said you'd finally cataloged your collection. I shook my head. I never sent you a catalog, and I don't have those books. We looked at each other, realizing that someone had created a fake catalog on my behalf. Austin and Bridget, I whispered. They're trying to portray me not only as incapacitated, but as a fraud, selling books I don't have. We need to contact Norman immediately, Enrique said firmly, and cancel the meeting with Professor Bradford. I turned the car around and headed back into town. Austin and Bridget's plan was becoming clear. They wanted not only to beat back my lawsuit, but also to discredit me by presenting evidence of my alleged criminal activities to the court. Don't worry, Enrique squeezed my hand. We will expose them. We have the truth on our side. I nodded, but inside me, not only anxiety was brewing, but anger as well. Austin had overstepped his bounds, and now I was determined to not only get mine back, but to make him accountable for all the manipulation and lies. The Whitefish County Courthouse seemed unexpectedly small for an event of this magnitude. The wooden benches, the worn floor, the smell of lemon polish. All of it gave the atmosphere of provincial justice, where everyone knew each other and there were few secrets. I sat next to Norman, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. Across the room, Austin and Bridget were whispering with their lawyer, occasionally casting nervous glances in my direction. Enrique took a seat in the front row behind us, his presence giving me strength. Judge Eleanor Ramirez, a woman in her 50s with a discerning eye and an impeccable reputation, was reviewing the documents, occasionally making notes. It's going to be all right, Norman whispered to me. We have irrefutable evidence. I nodded, but my insides were clenching. The last 3 months had been exhausting. The fake catalog of my book collection that Austin and Bridget had sent on my behalf was just the tip of the iceberg. They tried to make me look incapacitated, manipulated Dr. Harris's testimony, even forged a few financial documents. But the truth was on my side. Norman and his team methodically exposed each of their lies, and my editorial skills helped to put together a compelling account of all the events in chronological order, with supporting documents and testimony. On your feet, court is in session, announced the clerk, and all present rose. Judge Ramirez took her seat and addressed the court. Today, we are hearing the case of Parkhurst versus Parkhurst concerning abuse of power of attorney, financial fraud, and illegal sale of real estate. Both sides have presented their arguments and evidence. I have thoroughly reviewed all of the materials and am prepared to render a decision. She paused, looking around the room, and I felt my heart sink. Having considered all the circumstances of the case, the court finds that the defendants, Austin and Bridget Parkhurst, did abuse the power of attorney granted to them by the plaintiff, Helen Parkhurst. The sale of the house and the transfer of funds to the trust were done without proper consent and not in the best interest of the settlor, in direct breach of fiduciary duty. I heard Bridget draw in air sharply, and Austin went pale. In addition, the judge continued, attempts to portray the plaintiff as incompetent based on fabricated evidence are inadmissible and border on perjury. The report of an independent gerontologist, Dr. Chang, unequivocally confirms Helen Parkhurst's full capacity. The judge turned the page. The court orders the defendants to return to the plaintiff all funds transferred from her bank accounts in full, with interest at the rate of 6% per annum. The defendants are also ordered to pay compensation for the sold house in the amount of $750,000, which corresponds to its market value at the time of the sale. I closed my eyes, feeling the tension of the last few months begin to release me. In addition, the judge's voice became sterner. Given the willful nature of the defendant's actions and attempts to manipulate the court, they are fined $50,000. The defendants are also prohibited from approaching the plaintiff or contacting her in any way without her express consent for a period of 1 year. Bridget whispered something fiercely to her attorney, but the lawyer only waved his hands helplessly. "Do the parties have any questions for the court?" Judge Ramirez asked. Norman stood up. "Your Honor, we would like to clarify the terms of financial obligations of the defendants. All payments must be made within 30 days from the date of the judgment," replied the judge. "In case of non-compliance, the defendants may be subject to additional fines or other sanctions." When the hearing was over, I sat motionless, unable to believe that it was really over. We had won. Justice had been served. Enrique put his arm around my shoulders. "You did it, Helen. You fought and you won." "We did," I corrected him. "Without you and Norman, nothing would have been possible." Norman gathered the papers into his briefcase, smiling. The judge was ruthless. I've never seen Ramirez express disapproval so clearly. Austin and Bridget got what they deserved. As we left the courtroom, Austin tried to approach me, but the bailiff stopped him, reminding him of the no-contact order. "Mom," he shouted over the bailiff's shoulder, "can we talk? I want to explain." I paused for a moment, looking at my son. He looked aged and lost, not at all like the cocky man who'd sent me to Spain to sell my house. Part of me still loved him, despite everything, but I knew our relationship couldn't be the same. "Not now, Austin," I said quietly. "Maybe someday, but not now." I went outside where Dorothy was waiting for me. When she saw my face, she understood without a word and hugged me tightly. "You won," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." We celebrated the victory in a small restaurant by the lake. Norman, Dorothy, Enrique, and I, the little team that helped me get justice back. We drank champagne, laughed, and reminisced about all the twists and turns of the trial. "What are you going to do next?" Dorothy asked when the waiter brought dessert. "Buy a new house in Whitefish?" I wondered. It was a question that had preoccupied me for the last few weeks. Now that I had money and freedom of choice, what did I really want? "I'm not sure I want to stay in Whitefish," I admitted. "Too many memories, too much pain." "You could move to Kalispell or Missoula," Norman suggested. "Not far from here, but enough to make a fresh start." Enrique was silent, but I could feel his eyes on me. Our relationship had deepened and strengthened over the months. He'd stayed in Whitefish the whole time, supporting me through every step of the legal process, helping with the book sale, just being there for me in difficult moments. "Actually," I took a deep breath, "I'm thinking of moving to Barcelona." Dorothy smiled. "I knew it. You're in love with Spain." "Not just Spain," Enrique added quietly, and our eyes met. Norman raised his glass. "Here's to new beginnings, wherever they take place." The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Austin and Brigitte, as the court had ordered, transferred all the money with interest and the compensation for the house. I began my search for an apartment in Barcelona, contacting realtors and looking at online listings. Enrique went back to Spain to get everything ready for my arrival, but we called each other every day. Our relationship was still new, uncertain, but there was something special about it, a mutual respect and understanding that I had been missing for years. "I found an apartment you might like," he said during one of our calls, "in the Gothic quarter, not far from my store, overlooking a small square and an old church, the perfect place for a writer." A writer? I was surprised. "I'm an editor, not a writer." "Maybe it's time to change that," he suggested. "You've spent your whole life helping others tell their stories. Maybe now it's your turn." His words struck a chord with me. Really, why not write my own book? I had experience, knowledge, and now a story worth telling. 2 days before I left for Barcelona, another important event happened. I received a letter from Austin, not an email, but a real paper, handwritten letter. "Mom," he wrote, "I know that no words can undo what I have done. I betrayed your trust, deceived you, hurt you. There is no excuse for my actions, and I'm not asking for an apology I don't deserve. I just want you to know that I've realized my mistakes. Bridget and I have started seeing a couples therapist. I'm trying to figure out how I became this person and how I can change. I'm not asking you to come back or to stay in a relationship with me. I realize I've broken our bond, perhaps irrevocably, but if you can ever find it in your heart to find even a drop of forgiveness, I'll be waiting. Love, Austin." I reread the letter several times, feeling the mixed emotions struggling inside me: anger, hurt, disappointment, but also a glimmer of hope. Perhaps my son had truly realized his mistakes. Perhaps, in time, we could rebuild at least a semblance of a relationship. I didn't answer the letter. I wasn't ready, but I kept it, thinking that someday, when the wound wasn't so fresh, I might rethink my feelings. The day I left, Dorothy drove me to the airport. We both cried, hugging each other goodbye. "It's not forever," I assured her. "You'll come and visit me as soon as I'm settled, and we'll explore Europe together. Promise?" She wiped away her tears. "I've always wanted to see Paris and Rome." "I promise." I squeezed her hands tightly. "We'll tour Europe again, two restless retirees from Montana." We laughed, and I was relieved. I knew that even though I was leaving a lot behind, the most important thing, a true friendship, would stay with me despite the distance. Barcelona greeted me with sunshine and noise, the same city I remembered and loved. Enrique was waiting for me at the airport with a bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers. "Welcome home," he said, hugging me. The apartment he'd found was perfect, small but bright, with high ceilings and a balcony overlooking a quiet square. An old house with thick walls that held the stories of hundreds of lives spent here over the centuries. "Do you like it?" Enrique asked anxiously as we stepped inside. "It's perfect," I replied sincerely, looking around the spacious living room with two large windows and an alcove that looked like it was made for bookshelves. For the first few days, Enrique had shown me the city from the perspective of a local, not a tourist. We went to small markets where vendors soon began to recognize me and greet me by name. We drank coffee in tiny cafes hidden in the maze of streets in the Gothic quarter. We spent evenings in his bookstore, sorting through new arrivals and chatting with customers. Gradually, I began to feel part of this place, this life. I began to study Spanish more seriously, practicing with a teacher 3 times a week. I helped Enrique in the store, using my experience as an editor to evaluate rare editions. And in my spare time, I started writing. At first, it was just notes, memories, fragmentary thoughts. But gradually they formed into something more, the story of a woman who, at 73, lost everything, but found herself. 2 months after I moved to Barcelona, Dorothy flew in. Her visit was like a breath of fresh air. She brought news from Whitefish, photos, local gossip. "The whole town is talking about your lawsuit," she said as we sat on my balcony with glasses of sangria. "Bridget hardly ever shows her face in public. And Austin, he's changed, Helen." "In what way?" I asked cautiously. "He got a job at the high school teaching history. He stopped wearing expensive suits, sold their new car. They say he and Bridget are seeing a couples therapist." Dorothy paused. "He asked about you, wanted to know if you were okay." I felt something shake inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of the road to it. "Tell him I'm fine," I replied. "And that, maybe, someday we can talk." Dorothy nodded, not insisting on more. Instead, she changed the subject. "So, when are we leaving for our European tour? I've already packed my suitcase. Enrique and I have worked out an itinerary: Barcelona, Madrid, Paris, Florence, Rome, Venice. 2 weeks of traveling through the most beautiful cities in Europe." "Are you sure you want to close up store for 2 weeks?" I asked Enrique as we discussed the details of the trip. "The store can wait," he smiled. "Besides, I've been wanting to show you Florence for a long time. It's a city for those in love with books and art." I stared at him, this amazing man who had come into my life so unexpectedly and changed it forever. At our intertwined hands, at the map of Europe spread out on the table, at the sunlight flooding my new apartment. At 73, my life was not ending, as Austin and Bridget thought. It was just beginning. That evening, after Dorothy had gone to her room, I sat down at my computer and opened my book file. I wrote a new line: "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." Outside the window, evening Barcelona was buzzing. Voices, music, the clinking of dishes from the little restaurant on the square. Enrique was reading in an armchair, occasionally glancing at me with a warm smile. I was home, not in a place where I had been born or spent most of my life, but in a place where I was truly happy, with a man who saw the real me, with friends who had supported me through the hardest times, and with a story I was finally ready to tell, my own.